Hi there. This is Edgar Allan Poe coming at you from the body of James Valvis. The greatest leap of intelligence possession has ever known. And I'm going to be continuing my talk on diversity. Now, in the last talk we had, last discussion, we said how there are good diversities and bad diversities. You don't always know which one of those are either. Sometimes you think you're going for a good diversity and you end up with a bad one. Sometimes you think you're going for a bad one, you end up with a good one. Those aren't usually the case, though. Usually, when you're when you're trying to get a merit-based diversity, you usually end up in a better place than you started out. When you're trying to get diversity just for the sake of having diversity, you usually end up in a worse place. This is a very simple thing to figure out. That competency and skill itself has the value to overcome what are innate problems with diversity in and of itself. There is no net good from diversity. You have to understand that. It doesn't exist, really. If you have 6 people in a writer's group, say, and 6 of them are black, that's just as good as, or if not better, than if you have 5 blacks and a white, all merit being equal. The white guy may give a perspective that the black guys don't have, but you don't need that perspective. You think of something like the Harlem Renaissance. Some of the greatest writers to ever come out of the black community came out in the Black Renaissance. Would they have been incredibly helped by having Asian writers in there, or Hispanic writers, or white writers, or more women? None of that really matters. In fact, in some ways, it can be a detriment to a culture to have more people from the outside in it, because you cannot consolidate your ideas as well as you might in other forms, or you might run into problems where there's infighting. We talked about that a little bit last time, but this time I want to expand on that a little bit. I want to talk about how something like the Me Too movement is showing the true colors of the dangers of a diversity mindset. Because if you have a group of people and they are working together toward a goal, and one of those, and then you throw in a female, so let's say you have a group of men and you throw in a female, or you have a group of women and you throw in a male. It's the reasons why the sexes have been segregated forever. You throw this monkey wrench into the position, all of a sudden there becomes all kinds of issues. And it's not just sexual issues. Sometimes it's just the way people think. Women tend to think differently than men. Men tend to think differently than women. Progressives have a hard time understanding these differences between people. Either, maybe not understanding them, maybe they have a hard time accepting them. They have a hard time accepting that blacks don't necessarily want to have larger associations with whites. When I was in the Army, I was a young, idealistic, progressive type young man, and I would go into it was the early days when I was first stationed at Fort Sheridan. In basic training, you pretty much all run together, and you don't have a lot of choice about who you associate with or what you do. You're with a company or a platoon of men. There are 55 guys. You have your 4 guys in your own bay, and basically you do everything together, and you do it all jammed together, and there's no saying it at all. And so you march into the mess hall, and you eat next to the guy you stood in line with. and that's just the way it is. It's not, you don't question it. It's not a problem. You go alphabetical order or whatever order that you're in. You might be lined up by height for that day or who knows what. But when you get out of basic training, then there's more liberty. You have more ability to choose who you associate with. And so I would go into the mess hall, and the Army has excellent food, by the way. It's a kind of a myth that Army food is terrible. In the field, it's kind of terrible because you're in the field. But back at the base, the food is excellent. And I would go there and I would get my food and I would go to sit down and you would think it was I was in the Army in 1990, early 1990s. But you would think that it was a 1950 military base. All the blacks would be on one side, all the whites on the other. It was, it was like, I used to say it's segregated by soup. Because there would be like this, there would be the soup aisle where you could like pour yourself some soup in the middle, and on the left side of that soup were black people, and on the right side of that soup were white people. And it was a pretty even split in those days. And I say about, it was for enlisted men, for officers and many more white people. But for enlisted men, it was very, very even split. It was something like 60-40 black to white, which is much greater than the population, especially at the time, because blacks were probably only about 10% of the population, and now they're about 14%. But I would go there, and I would sit there, and I would look, and of course, you look at this, and you say, well, gee, all the black people over there, and all the white people over there, but I was new, so I didn't care, and I'd gone to schools where I was the minority, in the ghetto. I always ate by black. I had to eat by black people. There was no choice. And so, I would just take my tray, and there was a seat by the black people. I would sit at the end of the counter, and they would usually by myself, but also, in their space, so to speak. And they would look at me, and they're like, I remember this one sergeant, he looked at me, he said, "Hey, Valvis, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm eating lunch, Sergeant." He said, "All right, carry on." He wasn't mad about it. It was just odd to him that this white soldier would sit with the black soldiers. And this is the way we naturally segregate ourselves. We naturally do this. We don't. It's not an unnatural thing. It's not even a bigoted thing. It's just the way that we behave. And now that sergeant was not a bigoted person. He was actually a really awesome guy. But for him, it was strange that when there was a big crowd of white people over there and a big crowd of black people, that I would choose to sit by the black people. It almost seemed like, in some ways, it was an instigation, as if I was provoking them in some way. And of course, I wasn't doing that. I would never do that. But they, it was very clear to them that, they have their own way of going about the world. If you look at how black people name their children, DeBrickashaw, or at the college yesterday I saw somebody with the name Tiana, and it wasn't Tiaa, Tianna. It was T apostrophe Anna, Tiana. Now, when you do these kinds of things, what you're trying to say to the world is, we have our own culture. We are different than you. We're different. We're not white people. We're not going to call you Mary. We're not going to call you Jane. We're going to call you, Tabrikashaw or whatever. And we're not going to call you Joseph, and we're not going to call you Michael. We're going to call you Keyshawn, or Noshawn, or something of that nature. So it's wholly made up names that aren't even African based. They're just names that are different than white people's names. And so this diversity idea, that you have to have diversity to have a stronger network, just isn't true. And it isn't the way most people think. And I'm not talking about bigots here. I'm not talking about racist and horrible KKK people or the worst of the Black Power people. I'm just talking about regular people. Regular people segregate themselves. It just is. Now you could say, well, we certainly don't want our university to be that way, or we don't want, the army to be that way, or we don't want our literary magazine to be that way, and that's understandable. But the problem with that is that we see the falseness of it. We see the one-sidedness of it. Because what happens is always that you say, well, we don't want to have segregation. And what they mean is, we don't want to have white segregation. We are perfectly fine with having a literary magazine that includes nothing but gay people. But if you had a magazine that was include nothing but straight people, that or nothing but people who don't want to bake cakes for gays or whatever, those people would be looked at with hostility, whereas the people who have an all black magazine would not. So there's a lie at the center of it. We recognize these minority cultures as being both monolithic, and that cultural hegemony is a good thing, and then we say on this other side that you can't have any kind of not even a merit-based hegemony. In other words, if you're having a magazine and the best 25 writers you find are all white, well, you've got to find a way to work in some other ethnicities regardless, because having an all-white magazine is offensive in some way. And so we have to ask, why have we come to this place? Why have we come to a place where we have moved so far from what Dr. King called judging people by the content of their character? And when he said that, he didn't just mean, their virtues. He didn't just mean, their ability to, be honest, be trustworthy, to be fair, and the rest of it. He also meant to be their competency, their ability to achieve things in a punctual and a solid way. So why have we moved away from that toward a diversity of mere traits, rather than we're not judging people based on their character anymore or on their competency. We're judging them instead on their traits. It's a regression. This is why sometimes the left is being called the regressive left, because it's regressing back to this old mindset. It's just a different power dynamic, but it's the same kind of mindset. The mindset used to be that white people are naturally superior. Now the mindset has switched, and it says black people are naturally superior, or women are naturally superior. If you go to one of these leftist marches, you'll see people holding up signs saying the future is female. Now, could you imagine if someone held up a sign saying the future was male, or the future was white people, or the future was Christians, or the future was straight people? Could you imagine the outcry of anger that would come forth from that? And there's simply no reason why the future is female should be any less offensive. Of course it's offensive. It's discriminatory. It holds up a certain group as better than other groups. That kind of thought is actually counter to the idea of diversity. It is just changing the power dynamic. You may like the power dynamic better, but it's no better. It's like in the Animal Farm, where Orwell says, we used to have the human beings in charge and running things, and then the pigs are in charge running things. And it's not really any different. The pigs are no better than the humans. They're, in fact, some ways worse. And so we ask ourselves again, why this is happening. Why is this diversity garbage, and I call it garbage because it's not the true, the desirable kind of diversity. Why is this diversity of traits become so prevalent, especially among the left? And it's, as I said, it's simply a matter of power. It's simply a matter of these people trying to get more power. So when the Me Too movement started, right, and you would think that, oh, this is a great movement to make sure that women are treated fairly. Unfortunately, that may be some people's thought process, certainly was probably in the beginning. But almost as soon as this came out, I began seeing, my field is poetry and literature in general, literary magazines and that sort. I saw women calling for more women to be published, or to get awards, or to get editorships. And that's how you could fight the Me Too thing, is you could give them more publications and more awards. Now, this does not, as far as I know, this is not a call for, was not a call for equality. It was not a call for, oh, there's an injustice here, women are not being treated well. Anybody can see that's a farce. Women are vastly overrepresented in the editorships. If you look at agents for, say, young adult novels, I think it's 9-1 female. If you look at who's getting the awards, and who's getting the publications, and who's getting most of the accolades, it's almost universally female now, or minority. There is a certain level of old guard that skews the numbers. So you have a Billy Collins, or you have a Stephen King, and these writers have large numbers. A John Green raises the level of white male success extremely high, but these are relatively few. When you look at the bottom level of writers, the writers who are in the base of the success, the ones that are making $5,000 to $30,000 a year, it's all female. It would be like if you had a baseball league and roughly maybe 40 to 60% of it was white in the major leagues, and like the best paid players there, the ones who have been in the league longest, are all white, or many of them are white. But in the minor leagues, all you have is black people. It'll be all black. Every last one in the minor leagues is black. Well, eventually that's going to check away. You're going to have nothing but black people in the major leagues, and white people are going to be suppressed. They're going to be oppressed. And the thing about oppression is it never ends well. People feel that they think there's injustice. I have been cheated of my proper due. That's what injustice is. And so you don't want that. Anytime you raise somebody above somebody else for something other than merit, it becomes an injustice. And injustice can never, ever end well. It always ends in the long term with strife. It always ends with a backlash. And in this case, it could end in a race war, or it could end in a place where men and women have real difficulties with each other. If you look at what's happening with the Me Too movement, is all of a sudden we have an excellent economy right now, and we have more people looking for work. More jobs open than people are looking for work. But what if we had a tougher economy? I guarantee you would see a large increase. As soon as the economy starts to go down a little bit, and it always does, you're going to see a large decrease in female unemployment. You're going to see them drop quicker than male employees. And the reason for that is it's just absolutely frightening to businesses what's going on with the Me Too movement. You have no idea how difficult it would be for a small business to deal with a sexual harassment lawsuit. it could literally put the company out of business. It could end somebody, if they have a small pizzeria and they're hiring a one waitress for that small pizzeria or a counter help, and they think that there's a chance that they're going to get called on, some kind of sexual harassment, or somebody's going to end up going to Yelp and saying, the manager touched me on the back when he was passing one time and I felt really uncomfortable. If that kind of thing is going to happen, trust me, women are going to pay the price for that. That kind of absurdity, that kind of where you can't move without facing a lawsuit, is not going to end well for women. And so, again, why are we seeing this diversity movement? Mostly because it doesn't, and I've said this before, I call it cost me nothing progressivism. The people who push this stuff don't pay the price for it. They never pay the price for it. When you look at college campuses and they're all marching for diversity, or you gotta do more for black people, you gotta do more for women, you gotta do more for this. There's one thing they all have in common. They're all in college. There's a reason most people in college, or in college, or who are out of college, or who have college educations, or who have gone on to and have gotten their master's degree or teaching or whatever. There's a reason those people support race-based diversity initiatives, and it's because they've already got theirs. You can't take it away from them. You can't take it away from their children because they have all kinds of advantages. We talk about privileges. They talk about privilege all the time. But the privilege they're always stealing from is always some poor white boy in Appalachia who grew up with no indoor plumbing. That's the guy they're always taking from. They're always saying to him, oh, well, I'm going to virtue signal and say that, Sasha Obama should go to Harvard because she's black, but some kid who grew up in a ghetto, a white kid who grew up in a ghetto, some white girl who busted her butt and dealt with all kinds of family issues. Maybe her father's an alcoholic and her mother's a drug addict, and she was raped or something as a kid. They're gonna say to that kid, sorry, you may have gone through all that, and Sasha Obama may have had every advantages in the world, but she has a darker skin color than you, and so and plus her dad was president, so you just out of luck. Sorry. And that kind of thought process, that kind of thing where it costs you nothing to virtue signal. It doesn't cost your kids. It doesn't cost you. It costs somebody else every time. I just have no respect for that. I have no respect for that at all. And it's not that I don't want to see black people succeed. It's just I want to see the black people succeed who deserve to succeed. And it's not that I want to see women fail. It's that I want to see the women succeed who deserve to succeed. And of course, I want to have the success for myself that I deserve. And I want to have my daughter have the success that she deserves. And I think everybody deserves that. Everybody deserves that equal opportunity to be successful based on their own skill and effort. Now, the left argues something different entirely. The left argues that competency itself, skill, hard work, competency, all these things are simply products of the patriarchy. They're products of a racist system that was put in place a long time ago. And so black people aren't succeeding, not because they're not working hard enough or because they don't have the innate talent to do so, but simply because they've been oppressed. And in order to overturn that oppression, you have to have these quotas. You have to have racial diversity quotas in order to adjust for that. And the problem with that is, First of all, it's not true. Because we all know lots of black people who have been immensely successful. So how did they do that? I myself am an example of it. I come from extremely disadvantaged life and lifestyle. And yet somehow I muddled through. The reason I was able to muddle through, though, is because I was never told to be a victim. Or I was never allowed to be a victim. I was never allowed to accept that mentality without becoming, falling into complete despair. Because nobody would ever pat me on the back and say, oh, poor Jim. It just wouldn't happen. I just don't have any of the qualities that allow that to happen. But that mentality in itself is self-defeating. And so the left thinks that you can go and correct historical issues by putting in these quotas, but it always costs some other person the problem. It always causes other people problems, not themselves. They never say, "Oh, I don't think it's fair that so many white people have degrees, so I'm going to give my degree back. I'm going to say no, or my daughter is going to college, but I'm going to let some black person take, or some Hispanic person, or some migrant child, or whatever cause they're currently obsessing about, and let that person have her place." They don't do that. They always protect their own, and then they go out and they take from somebody else, usually somebody much more helpless than they are. And so their argument against that is the whole privilege argument. It's the patriarchy. It's all this other stuff. And it's just a setback in our mentality as a civilization. It's a setback in the way we see the world. Because if you allow people to rise up through their accomplishments, then eventually people will succeed who deserve to succeed, and the people in success positions will have earned it. A lot of times when you let people become successful who don't deserve it, first of all, they don't appreciate it because they didn't earn it. But second of all, we find out that they fail. They fail miserably. A lot of black people who are leading to better colleges on these diversity programs fail out very quickly. Then they suffer the disgrace and the shame of that because they were in a situation that they were not prepared for. They just simply weren't ready to. They weren't prepared to go to Harvard. It wasn't for them. They should have been. They would have done fine at the University of Michigan, but they didn't go to the University of Michigan because they got into Harvard because they were black. And so a lot of times, in order to stop this from happening, what you see is a dumbing down of the coursework. Because you can't just dumb it down for some people, you got to dumb it down for everybody. And so now we have all kinds of majors that sound almost like jokes. Gender studies and African American studies and some of the ridiculous health sciences and basket weavings and modern walking or whatever they're doing these days. It's just ridiculous. Some of these people, they don't deserve to be there, but they're there because we've lit them in on diversity platforms, and then we dumb down the material so that they can stick around. And what it's done is turned all our universities and all our institutions in general into increasingly incompetent places. They no longer function in the way they were meant to function, in the way they've always functioned, at a high level, because excellence is not the criteria. When excellence is not the criteria for anything, it suffers. If it's a literary magazine, it suffers, but it's not a big deal because it's just a literary magazine. But if it's a hospital, it becomes a very big deal. That's when people's lives start to be going on the line. When it's a police force, a lot of people are angry at the policemen. But policemen, like any other government institution, enforce diversity codes. And so when you bring down the quality of policemen, guess what happens? Sometimes bad things happen because you have people there who probably shouldn't be there, who are not qualified to be there. Whereas other people who were more qualified were cut out. They weren't the right race. Or they had to get that female onto the police force. And so they didn't let in the other guy. And so you have these issues. The end result of all this diversity, therefore, has got to be problems. You can't have a society that is based on something other than merit and have it function well. I mean, we can go back in history and see that, there was a reason why everything kind of worked in America. And that's because even within the framework of, prejudice, there was a level of commitment to excellence. If, let me put it this way, in the Major League Baseball, before we let in African Americans, which was a good thing, by the way, I'm not arguing that it wasn't, but before we let them in, we had, sports is one of those places where you really can't fake competence. A person strikes out, they strike out. A person hits a home run, they hit a home run. It's measurable. It's right there in front of your face. And so you can have real diversity in there, right? But it's a lot less obvious when you're in something else, or because there aren't a lot of eyes on it. It takes a lot of time to figure out who's not successful. So ultimately, we need to get back to a place where competence is prioritized and diversity is not considered at all. It is not important what you look like, what your gender is. None of that stuff's important. What is important is that you can do it, and you can do it well. And if that means that 98% of the people who can do it well are female, great. Let it be 98% female. And if that means that 98% of the people who can do it well are white, and great. Let it be 98% white people. Because in the end, we need a society that functions, that does the job and gets it done right. And I think this whole diversity lie is based on a bigotry. It's based on racism turned on its head. It's the idea that women and blacks and other minorities, gays, are not good enough. That you have to help them along because they're weak and they're stupid and they're hopeless. And they need you to nurture them because you're strong. You're the good guy. You're the hero. It's not the kind of racism that hangs people from a tree, but it is the kind of racism that looks at people and says, "Oh, poor you." If you remember the story, Everything Rises Must Converge by Flannery O'Connor, and I guess I'll close with this. She gets onto the bus with her son, and they're going on the bus, and she gives the little black boy, she tries to give the little black boy a coin. And she's being perfectly pleasant, she's being perfectly nice. But the mother of the child sees exactly what this is. She sees it's condescending racism. She sees that this woman thinks that they're like charity cases and that they can't do for their own. And the son of the mother, who is a racist, is horrified by this. And this is the left today. This is what they do. This is how they look at our fellow citizens, our fellow black citizens, and our fellow female citizens. They look at these people and they say, you're clearly not good enough, so here's a nickel. This was Edgar Allan Poe giving back James Valvis's body to him. And I hope you like this discussion we've had on diversity. Please like, comment, subscribe on this, and God bless.